The Xtreme 2 has got an update. It was something that we've all been asking for. So they've updated the LED notification light. Thank you, JBL. The question is, has it changed the sound in any way? Only one way to find out is to measure it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to record the JBL Xtreme 2 before the firmware update. So we're going from firmware 2 to firmware 2.3, recording it before the update and after it. I'm also at the end going to compare it to where we are now with the JBL Xtreme 1. So straight away, 53% volume, JBL Xtreme 2, before and after firmware 2.3 update.
I was ready to surrender my heart to you, only you. These lights all around me keep blinding my eyes from you and the truth. Don't tell me, don't tell me, don't tell me why. I know, no, no, you won't save my life, save my life. Baby, keep on, you keep on, you're making the waves. You and I will never be safe, be safe. If the walls come down, will you pick me off the ground? If the walls come down, will you save me or burn me down? I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight. Yeah. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight. Yeah. Feel like a dynamite, ready to explode right up in the sky. I need you to listen, I need you to hear, and don't show.
So first I'm going to say, any differences, it's hard to really grab from 2.0 to 2.3. They're going to be small. It's not like we've gone from no bass to having a huge bass. That would be obvious. But to my ears, and maybe it's my ears playing tricks with me, I think it sounds a bit sweeter after 2.3. I think there's a bit more to the sound, there's a bit more oomph. I call it sweeter. It's a bit more sparkly. Going off the top of my head, memory, trying to remember, firmware 2, firmware 2.3, I'm going to say I think it sounds a bit nicer. I'm not saying there's more bass, I'm just saying there's a little sweeter tone to my ears on my version to the sound. And it very much is hit and miss, depending on what hardware you've got with its JBL speakers. Your speaker may well be different to mine. So, that's top of my head, that's what it sounded like to me. Then I measured it. What were the differences? Firmware 2, firmware 2.3. So, the first thing you can notice, there is a difference going along most of the frequency range. 2.3, especially look at that high end, to 2.3. There's a bit more high end now on the 2.3. I look at the bass, 67, 17.1, 67, 17. Basically no difference on these recordings in the bass. However, if I look at 50 Hertz, just under -21 on the firmware 2, is a tad more on firmware 2.3. You could argue there's a little bit subtly on the lower bass, but this graph says the difference, if there is any, it's small, is that there's a bit more high end. There's a bit more in the upper mids. The frequency response measurement. So this is using test tones. This has nothing to do with the audio track itself. If I just use test tones, it says 2.3, half a decibel more on the bass. Half a decibel actually all the way along, even to 150 Hertz. And then it does say there's a bit more. If you look from 1000 Hertz up to 10,000 Hertz, 2.3 shows a little bit more impact there. But these are very small differences. And it says here on my test tone measurements, the very high end, about 15,000 Hertz, a bit of advantage to firmware 2. My recordings say a bit of advantage to 2.3. So these differences are very, very small, no matter how you measure them. So I've got to say, any differences are small, within margins of error. Obviously, I'm recording these separately. I'm doing the recording, updating, recording it after the update. Small changes in background noises, small changes placing in microphones can have a difference. However, I will say the differences seem consistent between frequency response charts and the actual track itself. Anecdotally, most people seem to be saying it does sound nicer. I would say it sounds nicer to me. Whether that's a trick of mine or not, I don't know. What's it sound like at maximum volume? To me, maximum volume is the best place to test your speaker. It's going to extremes. It's flat out. I find most differences really reveal themselves at maximum volume. So looking at the actual audio recording itself, those measurements show a slight advantage to 2.0. On average, -16.8, -17.1 makes 2.3 slightly quieter. But these are very, very small differences, all within margin of error. The bass, -20.9, -21.3 means a slight advantage to 2.0 also in the bass, within margins of error. But it does tally with the 53% recordings. Again, the big difference, well, I said big, the biggest difference that is easy to notice is at the very high end, 2.0, 2.3. There's a definite advantage on the high end to 2.3. But the differences are small. However, they are consistent from 53% and 100%. Frequency response, just using test tones. And that also shows the opposite to what the actual audio recordings show, as it did at 53%, a slight advantage now to 2.3 in pure test tones. The one thing that they agree on is in the mid-range, a little bit. There is an advantage to 2.3, but the differences are small. So it's a surprise to me, having, still saying it sounds a bit nicer to my ears, and it does seem there's a bit more in the mid-range. There's some tweaks along that frequency range, whether they're tweaks or not, or whether it's just differences that I'm hearing from, before and after that weren't really there or not. It sounds nicer to me. Recordings do seem to show small differences, but it's a surprise to me that firmware 2.0 seems to have a little bit more bass and go a little bit louder. Nothing significant, but a little bit louder, a little bit more in the bass. However, it does seem there's enough changes along the frequency range to give the firmware 2.3 a bit of a sweeter sound. More balanced, you may say, but changes between different speakers may not be exactly along those lines. But anecdotally, most people do seem to be finding that. Some people are saying that, oh, they've lost bass and it's not as nice. It's always a lottery when you do a JBL update. And let's face it, all they're saying was, they're not even saying the normal, they fixed some bugs. They're saying they fixed the LED notification light, and quite honestly, I didn't know there was a problem with that to start with. But that's my findings. Take it or leave it. I hope you find that of interest or of use. So whether or not there were changes, the question remains to me, okay, where are we now? Xtreme 1 versus Xtreme 2. There's still a difference of opinions of which speaker is the better. Was this an improvement or not? While the signatures are different, it's hard to say, well, that's better than that. And here is my comparison at 66% volume.
I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done. I think the girls with their nails done. Girls with their nails done now. Girls with their nails done now.
So Xtreme 1, Xtreme 2, very different sound signatures now. Direct comparison on that recording. Overall, throughout the whole frequency range, this was a bit of a surprise to me. Xtreme 1 minus 16.8, Xtreme 2 minus 17.5, which means overall the Xtreme 1 playing at the same volume, 66%, the Xtreme 1 plays a bit louder overall. So the bass peak minus 15.1, minus 16.1. The bass peak 1 decibel louder. Now, we're not saying it's anything natural, it's clearly boosted, but you do get more of a bass slam from the Xtreme 1. The difference is the lower bass. Xtreme 1 minus 30, 60, minus 39 to 50. Now, huge difference. Xtreme 2 minus 21, 9 decibels louder at 60 Hertz, 10.5 decibels louder at 50 Hertz. So the type of bass you get, the difference is huge. You get lower bass resonance with the Xtreme 2. You get bass slam a little bit overboosted on the Xtreme 1. You're going to like one or the other. However, the other difference is Xtreme 1 has a bit more of a boost at the high end, giving it a bit more clarity, albeit a thinner sounding signature. The Xtreme 2 kind of sounds more balanced until you get to the high end, and then you got the roll off. And just to have a look at the frequency response using test tones, I must stress there's a difference when you use test tones and real world tracks. Using test tones, you can see the Xtreme 2 at 66%, playing deeper, more extension, has a flatter signature all the way up to around the 6,000 Hertz mark, and then it rolls off steeply compared to the Xtreme 1. So depending on how you are measuring your frequency response, you could say the Xtreme 2 is flatter, or indeed the Xtreme 1 is flatter because it has more extension into the high end. However, it has more of a V-shape sound, making it sound a bit thin. You can see its peaks at either end and its dip in the middle, more extreme, and then the Xtreme 2's peaks, which are much flatter until you hit that roll off. You're going to like one or the other. Again, a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't quite remember that the Xtreme one was still a bit louder. Having said that, it's going to depend on the track. Given that the frequency responses are different, depending on the track, it will favour one speaker or the other. I think that track had a bit of an upper bass peak, which does favour the Xtreme 1. However, the differences between the two speakers are still clear. They basically go as loud as each other. One will be favoured by the track over the other, depending on that track. But the Xtreme 2 has a deeper bass. It's more extended into the lower bass. The Xtreme 1 still has more of a punch, which a lot of people just say, well, it's got more bass. But let's face it, the bass, you know, for me, is the resonance below that, and it's the warmth that you get from that particular type of bass. So I would say this Xtreme 2 is a warmer sounding speaker than the Xtreme 1, but the Xtreme 1 does have a bit more of a high end, which can give it a bit more in the way of clarity, but it's also a leaner sound. It's more of a V-shaped. In some ways, Xtreme 2 is more balanced, but then it has this big high-end roll-off. You could say it sounds a bit muffled. I still prefer the Xtreme 2 over the Xtreme 1. I do prefer the warmer sound and the smoother sound, you know, up to whatever it was, about 6 kilohertz. It's quite flat. Along that line, it is a bit overboosted for me, the Xtreme 1, but you're going to like one or the other. I don't think you can say one is better than the other or one is an upgrade. They are different in sound signatures. I know this is supposed to be about the firmware upgrade, but people still want to know, where does that firmware upgrade lead you at this point now? So with the latest firmware upgrade, this is where we are between the Xtreme 1 and Xtreme 2. For a lot of people, that's still the question. So hope you got something out of this, although, as I said, the changes are very small, but for me, definite. But small enough that it's going to vary between different speakers. So your update may not be the same as mine. And it may just be a byproduct of the way the firmware is working. And actually the firmware wasn't meant to change the sound anyway. We never know, because there's never been a point where JBL have said, we're going to change the sound of your speaker. They either hide it behind bugs are fixed or the LED notification has been fixed. And yet it's gone from firmware 2 to firmware 2.3, suggesting there's a lot more going on between. You know, it's a lot more than an LED notification to go from 2.0 to 2.3 at the end of the day. But JBL are JBL. So I hope you got something out of my video, and thank you for watching.
UK